"Trust me," my mentor Lucas said, sliding the protective statement across the table. I signed it because he'd never steered me wrong. 3 days later, that same document became evidence against me in a fraud investigation, submitted by Lucas himself. Before I tell you how everything fell apart, and how it all came back around, do me a small favor. Hit subscribe, drop a comment about where you're watching from, and help this story reach people who might need to hear it. Now let me take you back to how this all started. I couldn't afford a single mistake, but one was already waiting for me on my desk. The office was empty at 9 p.m., just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant gurgle of the coffee machine 3 floors down. I was reviewing compliance files, the same soul-crushing ritual I'd performed every night for 18 months. My mother's treatment costs were bleeding me dry, and this job at Kane Industries was the only thing keeping us afloat. I needed the overtime. I needed the stability. I needed to be invisible. That's when I saw it, a manila folder I didn't recognize, sitting perfectly centered on my keyboard. No label. No signature. Just 3 pages of transaction records with my employee ID stamped across the top. My hands went cold as I flipped through them. Falsified compliance approvals. Backdated signatures. All bearing my authorization code. I'd never seen these documents in my life. The transactions were sophisticated, small enough to avoid automatic flags, spread across different departments, routing through subsidiaries I barely knew existed. But they all had one thing in common: my digital signature, my employee code, my responsibility. Someone had been using my credentials for months, maybe longer, and I'd been too exhausted and distracted to notice. My phone buzzed. Email from Marissa Kane, VP of Internal Affairs. "Aaron, my office, 8 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone." I stared at those 2 words, "come alone," and felt my entire world tilt. This wasn't a routine check-in. This was an execution scheduled for morning. I tried calling my mother, but it was too late for her medication schedule. She'd be asleep, dreaming whatever dreams chemo patients have when their bodies are at war with themselves. I couldn't burden her with this anyway. She'd sacrificed everything to put me through college, worked double shifts at the diner until her hands cramped, believed in me when I had nothing to offer but potential. And now I was about to lose the job that paid for the treatment keeping her alive. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those documents, saw my signature on transactions I'd never authorized, saw the look on Marissa Kane's face when she'd fire me. At 3 a.m., I gave up and started going through my own files, searching for any explanation, any pattern that might make sense of this. Nothing. My records were clean. Every approval I'd actually made was legitimate, documented, cross-referenced. Which meant someone had deliberately created a parallel set of transactions using my credentials. Someone with access to the system. Someone who knew me well enough to forge my digital signature. At 7:45 a.m., I was pacing outside the break room when Lucas found me. Lucas Chen, my mentor, the senior analyst who'd taken me under his wing when I was just another terrified new hire. He had this easy confidence, the kind that made you believe everything would work out if you just trusted him. Lucas had joined Kane Industries 3 years before me, rising fast through the ranks with a combination of brilliance and charm that made executives love him. He'd been the one to recommend me for the promotion last year, the one who'd stayed late helping me understand the Byzantine compliance systems, the one who'd listened when I broke down talking about my mother's diagnosis. "You look like hell," he said, pressing a coffee into my hands. "What's wrong?" I told him everything: the folder, the falsified records, Marissa's ominous email. Lucas listened with that focused intensity he always had, nodding slowly. When I finished, he smiled, and for a split second, I felt relief. "I can fix this," he said simply. "How?" "Leave it to me." "But Aaron, listen, when you go in there, don't volunteer anything. Answer only what she asks. And if she mentions those documents, tell her you were following my guidance. I'll back you up. We've worked together long enough that my testimony carries weight." Something in his tone felt off, like he was reading from a script he'd rehearsed. But I was drowning, and he was offering a lifeline. What choice did I have? "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't want to drag you into this if it gets ugly." "Aaron, you're not dragging me anywhere. We're a team. That's what teams do, they protect each other. Now go in there, be honest, and let me handle the political part. Marissa respects me. She'll listen." I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored the small voice in my head asking why he seemed so prepared for this crisis, why his advice felt so precisely calibrated. Marissa's office was all glass and steel, designed to make you feel exposed. She didn't look up when I entered, just gestured to the chair across from her desk. For 30 seconds, she typed, letting the silence compress around me like water pressure at the bottom of the ocean. "Aaron," she finally said, folding her hands. We've identified irregularities in several compliance reports you signed off on. Reports that approve transactions which should have been flagged. I need you to walk me through your process. My throat was sandpaper. I follow the protocol Lucas established. Every report goes through him before I submit final approval. He reviews the risk assessment, confirms the documentation is complete, then I execute the authorization. It's a standard two-person verification system. Lucas Chen isn't under investigation. You are. The words hit me like a physical blow. I tried to explain, tried to describe the documents I'd found on my desk, but even to my own ears, it sounded like desperation. Marissa's expression never changed. She was a prosecutor dissecting a suspect, and I was failing every test. These transactions, she said, sliding a tablet across the desk, show a pattern of approved transfers that violate multiple compliance protocols. Vendor payments without proper documentation. Subsidiary transfers without board oversight. Consulting fees to shell companies that don't appear in our vendor registry. And every single one bears your authorization code. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. There were dozens of transactions, maybe hundreds, spanning back 9 months. The total amount was staggering, nearly $4 million routed through channels that should have triggered immediate red flags. I didn't approve these, I whispered. Someone else accessed my credentials. Someone forged these authorizations. Your credentials require biometric confirmation. Fingerprint and facial recognition. Are you suggesting someone stole your fingerprints and your face? I'm suggesting the system was compromised. Or someone with administrative access created false records. Marissa, I would never. We'll continue this conversation, she said, standing. In the meantime, you're suspended pending full review. Security will escort you out. Please surrender your badge, your laptop, and your access cards. The walk through the office was a nightmare. Everyone watched, some with pity, most with curiosity, a few with barely concealed satisfaction. Jessica from accounting actually smirked. Tom from legal looked away like I'd contracted something contagious. And Lucas, standing near the elevator bank with his phone pressed to his ear, gave me a small, sympathetic nod that somehow felt more humiliating than everyone else's stares combined. I stumbled through the rest of the day in a fog. My mother called around noon, her voice weak from the latest round of treatment. How's my brilliant son? She asked, the way she always did, like I was still 12 years old bringing home straight A's. Good, Mom. Great. Just busy with a new project. I couldn't tell her. Couldn't add this burden to everything else she was carrying. So I lied, felt the words corrode something in my chest, and promised to visit on Sunday. Lucas called me that evening, his voice warm with concern. I heard what happened. Aaron, I'm so sorry. Marissa's under pressure from the board, she needs a scapegoat. The CFO's been pushing for heads to roll ever since that shareholder lawsuit last quarter. But I've got a plan. There's a protective statement we can file, something that documents your training process and establishes that you were operating under supervision. It'll shield you legally. Will it work? Trust me. Have I ever steered you wrong? He emailed me the document an hour later. 5 pages of dense legal language that I barely understood, but it looked official. Professional. It had sections about standard operating procedures and chain of command and reasonable reliance on senior guidance. The document described a training framework where junior analysts operated under direct supervision of senior staff, with final accountability resting on the supervisory structure rather than individual executors. It made sense. It acknowledged that I'd processed the transactions but framed them as part of my legitimate job duties, executed under Lucas's direction. If anything went wrong, the responsibility would flow upward to the supervisory level, not downward to me. At the bottom was a signature line with my name. I read it 3 times, trying to find the catch, but the legal language was so convoluted that I couldn't tell if I was protecting myself or confessing to something. Lucas had said to trust him. Lucas had always protected me before. I signed it. I sent it back. I took the sleeping pill Lucas had recommended and collapsed into 12 hours of dreamless nothing. The next 2 days were purgatory. I couldn't access my work email, couldn't call anyone at the office without seeming desperate, couldn't do anything but wait and imagine worst-case scenarios. My savings account had exactly $3,000, enough for maybe 2 months of my mother's medication if I stopped paying rent, stopped eating, stopped existing. On the 3rd day, I got the email from Marissa that made my blood stop. Formal disciplinary hearing scheduled, Monday 10 a.m. The investigative board has reviewed additional evidence submitted by your supervisor, Lucas Chen, indicating knowing participation in compliance violations. You have the right to bring legal representation. The potential outcomes range from formal reprimand to termination and referral to law enforcement. Additional evidence. Submitted by Lucas. I read that line 17 times, trying to make it mean something different. But the words wouldn't change. Lucas, my mentor, my friend, the person I'd trusted completely, had submitted evidence against me. Evidence indicating knowing participation. I called him immediately, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. Aaron, hey, I was just about to call you. Listen, I know the email sounds bad, but what did you submit to the board? Silence. Then, carefully, the protective statement. The one you signed. It's part of the formal record now, which means the board has to consider it during the hearing. What do you mean, part of the record? You said it would protect me. It does. It establishes that you knew the protocols and chose to violate them anyway. Aaron, I tried to help you, but you have to take responsibility for your actions. The statement clearly outlines the training you received, the supervisory framework in place, and the independent decisions you made. That's protection through documentation. The words were so perfectly crafted, so rehearsed, that I understood with sudden, nauseating clarity, this had always been the plan. Every conversation, every coffee, every piece of advice, he'd been building this trap piece by piece, and I'd walked into it smiling. You set me up. I gave you options. You made choices. That's not my fault. Aaron, I have tremendous sympathy for your situation, but I can't compromise my professional integrity to cover for mistakes that aren't mine. The board asked me direct questions about your training and supervision. I answered honestly. Honestly? You manipulated me into signing a confession. I provided you with a legal document that accurately describes our working relationship. If you chose to interpret it differently, that's not manipulation, that's your own poor judgment. And frankly, this call is inappropriate. You're under investigation, I'm a witness, and this could be construed as attempted intimidation. I'm going to have to report this conversation to HR. He hung up. I sat in my apartment, staring at the walls, trying to breathe through the panic. My mother's treatment was scheduled for next week. I had $847 in my checking account after paying her latest pharmacy bill. If I lost this job, we lost everything. But something Lucas said kept echoing, I gave you options. Options meant alternatives. Alternatives meant he'd planned for multiple scenarios. And if he'd planned this carefully, he'd left a trail, he'd had to communicate with someone. Probably Nathan Brooks, the CFO who'd brought Lucas into the company and protected him through 2 previous internal investigations that had mysteriously evaporated before reaching conclusions. I spent the next 16 hours in a haze of caffeine and rage, pulling every email I'd ever received from Lucas, every chat log, every shared document. I searched my personal drives, my old laptops, even my phone backups from months ago. And there, buried in a forgotten thread from 8 months ago that I'd archived without fully reading, I found it, an email chain between Lucas and Nathan titled, Compliance Restructuring. Lucas's initial message, Nathan, per our discussion, I've identified the ideal candidate for our overflow routing system. Aaron Prescott. Clean record, financially vulnerable, trusting disposition. If we route the secondary approvals through his credentials while I maintain administrative oversight, any flags will stop at his desk. When Internal Affairs investigates, and they will eventually, we'll have documented evidence of independent action. I've already established the mentorship relationship. He trusts me completely. Won't see it coming. Nathan's response, elegant solution. Proceed with implementation. Keep the paper trail minimal but sufficient for legal cover. Remember, the best scapegoat is one who volunteers. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. There were 17 more emails in the chain, detailing exactly how they'd used my credentials, which transactions they'd routed through my authorization codes, even a discussion about how much financial pressure I was under and how that made me unlikely to risk the job by asking too many questions. They'd planned this. For months. Lucas had befriended me specifically because I was vulnerable, desperate, and grateful. He'd created a mentorship relationship designed to build trust and dependency. And when the scheme inevitably attracted attention, I'd be the sacrifice that protected them both. I printed everything. 23 pages of premeditation, each one more damning than the last. They'd been using me as a firewall for months, routing questionable transactions through my desk because my record was spotless. Lucas had befriended me specifically because I was vulnerable, desperate, and grateful. My phone buzzed. Lucas, meet me at Hannigan's Bar, 8 p.m. We can still fix this before the hearing. I've spoken to Marissa and there's a settlement option that could work for everyone. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stared at that message for a full minute. He was scared. He knew I might have found something, and he was trying to control the situation one last time, trying to gauge what I knew and whether I discovered the email chain. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to go straight to Marissa with the emails. But another part, the part that had trusted him, believed in him, called him friend, needed to look him in the eye and hear him try to explain. Hannigan's was nearly empty on a Tuesday night. Lucas was at the back booth, nursing a whiskey, looking oddly small without the armor of the office around him. When he saw me, he smiled, that same warm, reassuring smile that had convinced me to sign my own execution warrant. "I'm glad you came," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Aaron, listen, I know you're angry, but you have to understand the position I was in. Nathan gave me an ultimatum 6 months ago. I could advance to senior director or I could protect you, but not both. The transactions were already happening. Nathan was using multiple authorization paths, and he needed another layer of insulation. I chose survival. That doesn't make me a monster. It makes me a realist. You destroyed my life to save your career. I gave you a career. Before me, you were drowning in entry-level work, going nowhere. I taught you everything. I made you visible. I recommended you for the promotion that doubled your salary, the salary that's paying for your mother's treatment, by the way. And yes, I used you, but you benefited too. That's how the world works. Mutual exploitation is just another name for employment." He actually believed it. I could see it in his eyes. He'd rationalized this so completely that he'd turned betrayal into mentorship, manipulation into opportunity. In his mind, he'd done me a favor by giving me a job lucrative enough to exploit. "I have the emails," I said quietly. "Every conversation between you and Nathan. The whole plan, from the beginning. The best scapegoat is one who volunteers," that was Nathan's line, right? His face went very still. The whiskey glass paused halfway to his lips, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes, calculation, followed by a flash of genuine fear, then a smoothing back into false calm. "If you leak those, you'll implicate yourself. You signed off on those transactions. Even if I go down, you go down harder. The board will argue you were complicit. They'll say you knew about the scheme and participated willingly for financial gain. Your mother's medical bills create a perfect motive for corruption. The optics are terrible for you. Maybe. But you'll go down too. Aaron." He leaned forward, and his voice dropped into something almost gentle. "Think about your mother. Think about the legal fees, the investigation, the unemployment. She has maybe 6 months of treatment left before remission, right? Can you really afford to blow this up right now? Is revenge really worth watching her die because you couldn't pay for her medication? My mother." He knew exactly where to press, exactly how to twist the knife. And the horrifying thing was, he was right, exposing him would probably ruin me too. The firm would close ranks. They'd settle quietly with Lucas, give him a golden parachute, and leave me as the public face of the scandal. I'd be unemployable, broke, watching my mother deteriorate because I'd chosen pride over pragmatism. But staying silent would kill something in me that I'd never get back. It would prove that Lucas was right about everything, that loyalty was weakness, that trust was stupidity, that the only thing that mattered was survival at any cost. I stood up. "I'm sending the emails to Marissa. Not because I think it'll save me. Because you need to learn that people aren't just tools you can use and discard when they've served their purpose." Lucas's expression hardened, the false gentleness evaporating. "You're making a mistake. A huge one. I've been protecting you from Nathan this entire time. He wanted to throw you to the prosecutors immediately. I convinced him to let it play out as an internal matter. If you burn me, I'll make sure he knows you're the one who forced his hand. Nathan has friends at the DA's office. They'll come after you for fraud, wire transfer violations, maybe even RICO charges if they can connect enough dots. You'll spend the next decade in legal hell. Then I guess I'll see you there." I walked out of that bar and went straight home. I encrypted the email files, attached them to a message addressed to Marissa Kane, and wrote a single line, "Evidence of systematic compliance fraud orchestrated by Lucas Chen and Nathan Brooks. I was their scapegoat. These emails prove it. I understand this may not save my job, but it's the truth." My finger hovered over the send button for maybe 10 seconds. Then I pressed it. The reply came back in 4 minutes. "Received. Come to my office tomorrow, 7 a.m. This conversation stays between us until I've completed my review. Do not discuss this with anyone." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights blur through exhaustion, wondering if I'd just committed career suicide or finally taken control of my own story. Around 4 a.m., I called my mother's night nurse and asked her to tell my mom I loved her, just in case tomorrow went as badly as I expected. Marissa's office at 7 a.m. was different, softer light, coffee already poured, her expression unreadable but less hostile than before. "I've reviewed your evidence," she said without preamble. "All 23 pages. I've also cross-referenced it with server logs, access records, and transaction timestamps. It's comprehensive and damning. Lucas Chen and Nathan Brooks have been running a systematic scheme for at least 14 months, possibly longer. You were the designated fall guy. Relief crashed through me so hard I felt dizzy. So I'm cleared? Technically, yes. Morally, yes. Legally, it's complicated but defensible. Practically? She paused, choosing words carefully. Aaron, even though you're innocent, your name is now attached to this investigation. The board will clear you officially, issue a formal apology, probably offer you a small settlement to prevent a lawsuit. But the market has a long memory. Every future employer will Google you and find articles about the Kane Industries compliance scandal. You'll be vindicated in the fine print, but the headlines will always say, Aaron Prescott, involved in fraud investigation. That stink doesn't wash off easily. The words landed like stones in my chest. What about Lucas and Nathan? Nathan will resign effective immediately for health reasons. He'll sign an NDA, take his severance package, and disappear into consulting or early retirement. Lucas will be terminated for cause, which means no severance, but he'll land somewhere else within 6 months. That's how this works at their level. They have networks, reputations independent of any single incident. People will remember their successes and conveniently forget their failures. That's it? They destroy my career and they just move on? Welcome to corporate justice. I'm sorry, Aaron. I genuinely am. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. The ethical thing. But ethics and outcomes don't always align. She slid a folder across the desk. This is your official clearance letter. HR will contact you about the settlement. And Aaron? Off the record, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen dozens of people in your position. Most of them stay silent because they're scared or they think they can't win. You're one of maybe 3 who actually fought back. That takes courage most people don't have. The compliment felt hollow next to the reality of unemployment, but I took the folder anyway. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. Kane Industries issued a press release about personnel changes following an internal audit. My name wasn't mentioned, but industry blogs picked up the story, and somehow my LinkedIn profile got attached to speculation threads. I got messages from former colleagues, some supportive, most carefully neutral, a few openly accusatory. Lucas left Kane Industries 3 weeks later. His LinkedIn updated to strategic consultant, independent practice. Within 2 months, he joined a boutique advisory firm in Boston with a title and salary that probably exceeded what he'd made at Kane. Nathan retired to a beach house in Maui. I found this out from his Facebook page, which featured photos of him smiling on a yacht with the caption, New Chapter, Grateful for Life's Blessings. Marissa got promoted to SVP of Compliance and Ethics. She deserved it, she'd actually done her job, but the promotion felt like the universe's way of proving that doing the right thing benefits everyone except the person who does it. And I sat in my apartment, vindicated and invisible, sending out resumes that went unanswered for months. The settlement from Kane Industries was $47,000, enough to cover my mother's remaining treatment and 3 months of living expenses. Not enough to rebuild a career that had been firebombed from orbit. My mother didn't know the details, just that I'd decided to pursue independent opportunities. She was proud of me for being entrepreneurial. The guilt of that pride was crushing. Around month 4, I started getting different kinds of calls. Small firms, startups, nonprofits looking for someone who understood compliance and had a reputation for integrity. The jobs paid half what Kane had. They came with no benefits, no security, no prestige. But they came. A whistleblower advocacy group offered me a part-time consulting position helping other people navigate situations like mine. A legal aid clinic wanted someone who could translate corporate compliance systems for pro bono fraud cases. A tech startup needed an ethics advisor who'd actually stood up to corporate pressure. I built something out of the wreckage, a consulting practice helping people who'd been betrayed by the systems meant to protect them. Every client who walked through my door carried the same haunted look I used to see in the mirror. And when I helped them find their way through, when I watched that look fade into something like hope, I remembered why I pressed send on that email. Not because I thought I'd win, but because some fights are worth losing. My mother went into remission 9 months after the Kane Industries implosion. The treatment worked. We were still paying it off, would be for years, but she was alive and laughing again and trying to set me up with her nurse's daughter. She didn't fully understand what had happened at Kane, just that her son had stood up when it mattered. That was enough for her. It had to be enough for me too. Last week, I got an email from an unsigned address. No subject line. Just a link to an article, former CFO Nathan Brooks under federal investigation for securities fraud. And below it, 3 words, karma's slow but thorough. I don't know who sent it. Maybe Marissa. Maybe someone else Lucas and Nathan had burned along the way. Maybe it doesn't matter. I deleted the email and got back to work. The past doesn't own me anymore. But sometimes, late at night when I'm reviewing contracts for a client who's terrified of being scapegoated the way I was, I still think about that moment in Hannigan's bar, Lucas across the table, so certain he'd won, so sure I'd choose safety over truth. I think about how close I came to believing him, to accepting that survival trumps everything else, that loyalty is just another word for weakness. And I'm grateful I didn't. Because the only trap you can never escape is the one you build for yourself, the one where you sacrifice who you are for the promise of security that never comes. I learned that the hard way. But I learned it. Before you go, if this story resonated with you in any way, take a second to support the channel. Subscribe for more real-life stories like this, tap the like button so it reaches others who might need it, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories get heard.